Hello everybody and welcome back to Red Eagle Politics. Make sure you guys like this video down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new. So Donald Trump currently leading Kamala Harris nationally. That is not in, a swing state, that is nationally. The popular vote, which Donald Trump has never won, which no Republican has won since 2004, and before that, it was 1988. However, it's important to understand that Donald Trump can lose the popular vote and he can win the Electoral College as he did in 2016. And there is a bias in the Electoral College, and people are going to debate if that's going to shrink, but it's very evident that if the popular vote is going to at all go to Donald Trump, or even if it's like under 1 point, most people agree it's very, very likely that Donald Trump is going to win the election. And we haven't seen a lot of polls recently this week nationally. Some pollsters dropped their final polls on Monday, for example, and other polls that we see in the mix, like Morning Compost even, they had to move down from a Harris +4 to a Harris +3. And then you look at Economist YouGov, they moved down to a Harris +2. So you're kind of seeing even the more liberal polls, they're starting to move right, and Donald Trump is picking up steam in them down the stretch. And you talk about the state of the race. It's basically a jump ball in the popular vote. There's very few undecided voters. You're talking about, in this current polling, 3.6%. Some of those will go third party, some of them will stay home, but the truly undecided voters in polls, there's a reason to believe Donald Trump's going to overperform, and it's because your undecided voter, they typically are not going to be, I guess you would say, tuned into the news, cable news all day long. They're not. Your undecided voter does not really care much about the media, and they're very skeptical of the media. Otherwise, they would not be undecided. They would not be open to Donald Trump. Also, they tend to care about the economy as their top issue, and not mentioned in this tweet is how a lot of them tend to be men. That is just a recipe for Donald Trump to possibly outperform the polls when it's all said and done. We don't have confirmation if that's going to happen yet, but when you look at the current state of polling, Donald Trump is in a good spot. Not only does he lead the aggregate, not only does the historically accurate, Q3 aggregated Gallup Party ID data show a Republican electorate by several points, which they've never showed before in history, in a presidential year at least. It shows that Republicans are in for potentially a great year, mainly thanks to Donald Trump. But you have to also look at the swing state polls, because Donald Trump is surging in a lot of these states. And Wisconsin and Michigan, there were a couple polls. There was a CNN poll in both, and that did allow Harris to retake the lead. And they have the states voting like it's 2012 again and voting far to the left of Pennsylvania. They're not going to age well. Even if Donald Trump loses both of those states, the CNN poll is going to age very poorly. But Pennsylvania, I wanted to focus on, because Donald Trump is in a very good position, because North Carolina, he can win North Carolina. He's up in the polls there. I think they're underestimating him, to be honest, in North Carolina. But even some of the polls that have underestimated him a lot, like Marist, which had him losing by 6 twice, now has him winning it by 2. And then you look at the state of Georgia, where Donald Trump leads every single poll. He leads the gold standard from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution by 4 in their final poll. And polling in Georgia does tend to be accurate. So he only needs Pennsylvania to cross the finish line. That doesn't take away from the fact that he's surging in Arizona. The early numbers look great there. They look very good in Nevada. He's surging in Nevada. He's up in all of those states. But Pennsylvania is definitely crucial, and that we know. And look at the polls in Pennsylvania all the way, because New York Times is going to drop another one. I don't know if they're going to have a Harris plus anything, but they don't know how to pull the Rust Belt to save their lives. But you have Rasmussen, Trump +3. Many people will point out that may be a right-leaning pollster, but again, in 2020, they underestimated Trump by 2 points in Pennsylvania. They were still the most accurate pollster. Franklin and Marshall has Donald Trump up by 1. They're a very liberal pollster. I think they had Hillary winning it by double digits and she lost. Then you have Trafalgar, Trump by 3. Morning Compost, Harris +2. Emerson, Trump +1. NSOR is a tie. Insider Advantage, Trump +1. Atlas Intel, best pollster in the country. We'll see if that holds up this cycle, though. Trump +3. And then you have several ties, and you have a Trump +2 from Quinnipiac. He was down in their last poll. And even Fox News, which is not a right-leaning pollster, they have Donald Trump up by 1 point. So you look at this, he's up in the aggregate in Pennsylvania. Harris hasn't really led a poll since early October in Pennsylvania. Even some of these pollsters that, did have Fetterman up big and were correct in 2022, like Franklin and Marshall, even they have Donald Trump up. And I tell people you cannot compare a presidential year to a midterm year. You want to look at the 2018 midterm polling errors. They underestimated some Republican Senate candidates in like deep red states. That's true. They were off the mark in Florida, just like they were off the mark in Florida in 2022, underestimating Republicans. But in places like Arizona, Georgia, Wisconsin, they actually overestimated Republican support in a lot of those key races there. And that doesn't get talked about a lot, but it's true that they overestimated Republican support. And in terms of Pennsylvania, this is basically the ball game. And Donald Trump has shown a consistent ability to build a lead. And in some of these polls, Susquehanna, he leads the election day vote by 20. If he wins it by 11, he's going to probably win the election narrowly. If he wins it by more than that, we'll see what happens. But also, you see what's going on with Bucks County in Pennsylvania. Republicans successfully were able to stop potential election shenanigans because we finally have an RNC that fights back. And, we're seeing stuff like that happen. You're seeing people get caught. Maybe that means that a lot more people are going to have their confidence restored in the system, which is very good, and people need to get out and vote, and hopefully you have a very large election day turnout this year for Trump in Pennsylvania, because if you get one, he's probably going to cross that finish line the way things stand today, and he is surging. Even in Wisconsin, it gets masked because of that CNN garbage poll, but if you take that out of the average, Donald Trump leads in Wisconsin. And look at Wisconsin in 2016 and 2020 with 6 days to go. Hillary led by 5.4%. Biden led by 6.4%. That's an average error of like 6 points. Both cases were roughly a 6-point error. So I'm not saying you're going to see that now because you have less undecideds, but could you see like a 3 or a 4-point error? Absolutely. That CNN poll's an outlier. It's likely not going to age well. We don't really have a lot of early voting data out of Wisconsin that you can analyze deep because a lot of people in Wisconsin, it's not like Nevada where 90% of the electorate votes early. It's not like even Pennsylvania where they register by party. But the data we have shows that you have a lot of turnout in places like Waukesha County, Wisconsin, Washington County, very Republican areas. And the turnout in those counties is juiced by the reddest parts of those counties. Even like Dane County, you're seeing a lot of that too in some of the outskirts of Dane County, which are not as liberal. But Milwaukee is kind of a disaster for turnout. And that would add up from what we've seen in other states where you have low black turnout in general, low, younger voter turnout in general. The people that do show up probably do end up voting for Donald Trump at record numbers. I think he's going to do very well with the 18 to 24 demographic, especially among men. He might win men under 30 outright. I would not be surprised. Men need to get out and vote. That's true. I've gotten a lot of questions about people talking about the early vote, saying, well, they say 54, 55% of the early electorate is women. Democrats are saying that's a good thing, but they're actually Republican women that are making up a larger share of the electorate. They just happen to be more likely to be converted to like becoming an early voter more so than men. I guess we're more stubborn or something like that. But still, even then, the female percentage is down from years past. And in states that are like universal vote by mail, like California, men are almost voting even with women. They're like outperforming technically compared to where they stand in the electorate. So you kind of see that in a lot of states as it stands. But you look at Wisconsin, you look at all these states, he is indeed surging outside the CNN, I guess you would say, outlier. And Eric Hovde is also surging. It's possible if Trump wins those three Rust Belt states, he could win a Senate seat as well in every single one of them, because those are all three very close races. And the polls have tightened in all three of them down the stretch. So in terms of Pennsylvania, there's a lot of people that say, like, what's the pathway for Donald Trump to win? And like in a lot of the polls that were released today, even the polls that were like tied, showed Donald Trump surging with white working class voters. Quinnipiac in particular, they had him getting like It was like a 64-34 essentially split in the white non-college vote. And they do have him losing ground with white college graduates. I don't know how much that's really going to be. Polls have underestimated Trump every time with white college grads, but then they've like overestimated him with minorities. But still, he's going to improve with minorities, and he could lose with white college grads. But let's say he, loses, he gets down to like 41%, because I don't think you're going to see a lot of two-time Trump voters bail. And then you talk about Trump making some sort of gains with black voters in Philadelphia, Hispanics. They are really trying to hammer home that Puerto Rico thing. I don't believe it's really going to work. I think Trump's going to improve with Puerto Ricans, actually, just like he did in 2020. I think it's just one of those things where the media is just taking something and running with it and making a non-story a story. Maybe it'd be different if Trump said the comment himself instead of somebody that Trump's never heard of. And then you look at the Asian vote. It's possible Trump might make gains because there is like that other category. And there are some Muslims that live in Pennsylvania, not nearly as many as Michigan, but Trump is improving with that demographic, and he might do better among like certain working class Asian groups, but it doesn't really seem to be the type of demographic that's in Pennsylvania. So their turnout probably does go up as they become a larger share of the electorate. Same thing with Hispanic voters there. Black turnout probably does end up falling. It's not looking good in the early data at all. It's a big task for Democrats to get unenthused voters out to the polls on election day. And then in terms of the white college grads, turnout's probably going to dip a little bit, and it'll dip a little bit here because, we're not having that pandemic level turnout. But overall, the electorate, as you see it here, Donald Trump would win the state by around 2 points. He'd flip back the bellwether counties of Northampton, Erie, at least the bellwethers that dictate the winner of the state. He would improve in Bucks, wouldn't be enough to flip it. And if he has a really good night, he can. And it is true that the swingometer doesn't really take everything into account because it is true, like Biden had a unique point of strength up in a place like Lackawanna County. It's possible that you could even see unique shifts there that this map wouldn't account for. Same thing goes for like Delaware on the swingometer because Biden was from there. It's probably going to rebound back a decent amount. It's not really that competitive, obviously, but it could be within 10. At least it's going to look more like 2016 than it did in 2020. But even in some of these suburbs, because he's going to do better with white working class voters in these suburbs, and because turnout's going to be lower in Philadelphia overall, you're going to see Donald Trump make some improvements, even in some counties people probably wouldn't have expected if he has a good night. And keep in mind, he needs to win the election day vote by like 11 at the rate things are going, and he's going to win the state. And Wisconsin's a similar phenomenon. I tell people this, it all comes down to turnout. If you see Donald Trump improve by just a few points with white working class voters, which Biden had the unique point of strength with, and you had a bad environment for Trump in terms of, the pandemic and everything, BLM, you name it, a lot of these election law changes, many of which, but not all, are still in place. That's a big boost to Trump already. He's picking off counties. He's winning the state big. And even though he might lose a little bit with like white college grads, for example, it's likely not going to be enough. And he probably gains with black voters. Turnout goes down, you name it. That would be a big help to him in the state as well. You can see what it looks like. It's going to be hard if he does make those improvements with white working class voters and they have to turn out. And so far in the early data, certain counties, it looks like that's happening, not just in Wisconsin, but in Georgia, Michigan, across the country. But still, there's a lot we don't know. You can't read too much into the early voting. It looks good, but people need to get out and vote, or it's not going to look too good. There's only one poll that matters. It's not, some of these early returns that we can try to model for. It's not the polls on RCP. There's one poll, and some people have taken the poll if they're doing early voting. Some people are going to do it on election day, but they need to make sure they do it regardless. So anyways, guys, thanks for watching this video. Like this video down below, comment down below, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell for notifications so you never miss another video. Follow me on social media. The links are all in the description down below, and I will see you guys in the next one. Red Eagle, out.